Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. My name is Lizzie, and I'm the Public Programs Manager here, and I'm thrilled to welcome you in person and online to this presentation about Henri Bendel. And I'm thrilled to have Tim Allis here with us to share about his book, Henri Bendel and the Worlds He Fashioned. For our virtual participants, you're going to notice that you're muted and that you can ask questions in the chat. Please do so, because at the end, we're going to read those questions from the chat. People in person, we're going to do the traditional put your hand up. We'll pass the mic around. I'm the easiest possible. Also, for our virtual participants, you can buy Tim's book in our museum store at msjestore.org. And for people in person, I see that we already have quite a few folks who have their own copy, but there will also be a book signing at the end where Tim has graciously agreed to sign his books. Please buy the book and then get it signed. There's also some cookies and lemonade in the museum. Okay, without further ado, why we are actually here today, to hear from Tim Allis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Tim, and then he's going to talk a little bit about Henri Bendel. So Tim Allis was born in New Orleans and raised in Lafayette, and was a senior editor at InStyle magazine, where he covered a wide swath of subjects and profiles, such as stars as Alicia Keys, Julia Roberts, and Matthew McConaughey. Prior to InStyle, he wrote for People, and before that, for D Magazine in Dallas, where he got his start while attending SMU. His work has also appeared in Out, Time Out New York, Saveur, Men's Health, CNN.com, and Playbook.com, among others. A dedicated theater goer, he has dabbled in playwriting. Henri Bendel and the Worlds He Fashioned, published by UL Press in Lafayette, came out last fall. As Henri Bendel did, Tim and his partner divide their time between New York City and Lafayette. Without further ado, Tim.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, brave souls, for coming out in this weather. It's very appreciated, and thanks to everyone who's streaming this online. This is just, I'm so grateful to be welcomed to this wonderful and important museum and learning research center. It's such a great asset to New Orleans and to Louisiana and to all of the South, for that matter. Shall we? You're a Bendel bonnet, a Shakespeare sonnet, you're Mickey Mouse. That, you may know, is from the song You're the Top, from the classic Cole Porter musical Anything Goes. Milliner, clothing store magnate, connoisseur, and Porter's shorthand for perfection. The man behind the brown and white stripes. Henry Willis Bendel, who lived from 1868 to 1936, was a setter and seller of style. A cavalier, canny businessman, hat and dressmaker to the Astors and Vanderbilts, stars of stage and screen, and most of fashionable New York, and beyond New York, I might add, at the sunset of the Gilded Age and dawn of the Jazz Age. Costumer to the great and grand, declared the New York Tribune. Fierce devotee of all things French. In fact, he launched Coco Chanel in America. And yet the same man who encouraged U.S. dressmakers to step up and assert their independence from France. Bendel was an American in Paris, a Southerner in Manhattan, an empire builder who redrew the map of fashion retail, turning then strictly residential 57th Street into the Rue de la Paix of New York. Perhaps the most influential fashion overlord ever, who helped usher in radical changes in women's dress between the 19-teens and 20s, who introduced his well-heeled acolytes to such French couture icons as Schiaparelli and Molyneux. A creative businessman who gave New York some of its first in-store fashion shows, first high-end clearance sales, first fragrance branding, and, ahead of his time, rewarded his employees with profit sharing. He was a man with passionate perceptions. You go into the home of an American millionaire, he said, and it smells of money. But in the home of a French marquis, you breathe. And a knack for dramatic flourish. Quote, I'd give it to my mother-in-law if I didn't like her, but it's no gown, no style, take it away. Many know about the now shuttered store Henri Bendel, which closed in 2019. Few know much about Henri Bendel, the man. And if you're wondering why I'm not saying Henri Bendel, turns out that's just one of many myths about him that got passed along over the decades, that he was French. He called himself Henry, except no doubt when he was in France, and the family name is pronounced Bendel. Legendary in his heyday, roughly the early 1900s through the mid-30s, and celebrated in the pages of Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, and newspapers of the time, the, quote, genial dictator of American fashion, unquote, has receded into hazy history. No one up till now had written a book about him. I'm going to take you on a spin through Bendel's life and the history of the store, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what it was like hunting for the elusive Mr. Bendel. Among the many mysteries I encountered along the way, this one looms large. How could someone so famous get so misplaced by history? His unlikely rise began in Vermilionville, Louisiana, now known as Lafayette, 2 hours west of here. Lafayette is also where I grew up, in a subdivision on land that had once been his estate, Bendel Gardens. Isn't it perfect that Henry, the ultimate Francophile, would be born in a town with a French moniker like his own, Vermilionville, named for the adjacent reddish-brown Vermilion River. His parents, William Bendel and Mary Plonsky, were Jewish immigrants from Austria and Prussia, respectively. After marrying here in New Orleans, Mary and William settled in Vermilionville with Mary's older sister, Fremont Plonsky, and her husband, Lazarus Levy. The Plonsky sisters had lived in Alsace-Lorraine before immigrating, so they both spoke fluent French, which melded well with the Cajun culture they found themselves in. Mary and Fremont and their spouses and their progeny would, in time, become prominent leaders of the Jewish community of Vermilionville/Lafayette, as well as important civic and business figures. Henry, who was given the name Henry with an I at the end, Henri Henry, was the third of William and Mary's 7 children. Again, born 1868, so just after the Civil War. After his father's sudden death when he was 8 years old, I believe on a business trip to New Orleans is when his dad passed away. After his father's sudden death when he was 8, his mother Mary, facing the prospect of raising 7 kids on her own, got remarried to a fellow Prussian immigrant and store employee named Benjamin Falk, who was 14 years her junior. The couple added one more child to the brood, Henry's half-sister Emma, and together the family ran a dry goods outfit, a hardware store, a funeral parlor, and a small opera house above one of their stores. They even sold mules and horses. Mr. Falk became a doting stepfather to Mary's kids, and he and Mary instilled in all of them a commitment to hard work and a knack for commerce. Shy and sensitive but keen, as a boy, Henry showed a strong artistic streak. A friend recalled him making paper art, including paper dolls. She remembered, quote, children used to tease him because they thought he was so feminine. His having been made fun of no doubt stung, I assure you, but not enough for him to suppress his impulses or arrest his creativity. Perhaps such childish cruelty predicated on stereotypes about masculine and feminine behavior thickened his skin and spurred him on in defiance. At age 7, Henry's mother and stepfather placed him in an elite local school where he had early exposure not only to history and literature and math and science, but also to the manners of the old royal courts of France, of all things. I mean, I found that in one source and without much more detail, but I thought that was rather fascinating. An apt pupil. By age 12, Henry was ready for even more challenging education. So in the fall of 1880, he was enrolled here in St. Charles College, a Jesuit boys' school in Grand Coteau, Louisiana, about 15 miles north of Vermilionville. This was in essence a very rigorous high school. Bilingual since infancy, French and English, he now was gaining exposure to German, Latin, and Greek. and his enthusiasm for art and drama were encouraged by the Jesuits. He won academic prizes, sang in the choir, acted in plays, and owing to his flair for all things artful, he was invited by the priests to decorate the altar at Christmas, Easter, and other feast days. He also tended to the Jesuits' ecclesiastical vestments. According to Morris Crawford, a women's wear editor to whom Bendel later in his life shared stories of his upbringing, there at St. Charles College, there young Henry, quote, saw for the first time those fine fabrics which were to be of lifelong interest. At age 16, after a few, I guess 2 years here, fortified with $1,500 from his mother, which was quite a lot in those days, because the family had in very short time become fairly prosperous in Lafayette, Vermilionville. At age 15, he set out from Vermilionville and first worked at a plantation store in Raceland, Louisiana, then spent a year or so here in New Orleans, presumably working some kind of clerk job. And he no doubt took in the impressive department stores like D.H. Holmes and Godshaw's, relishing their style and grandeur and studying their merchandising techniques. Next, you got to go back before you can go forward. Next, he landed in the small but bustling port of Morgan City, Louisiana, where he worked in and eventually took ownership of the Red Star dry goods store. And it was there that his fortunes changed in an instant. He met Blanche Lehman, a divorcee from New York City, when she was visiting her brother Charles, whom Bendel worked with. Charlie Lehman worked at the Red Star store. The Lehman family had started out in New Orleans, and after making a success in the millinery supply and feathers business, they moved to New York, save for Charlie, the eldest, who stayed behind in Louisiana. Sidebar that I won't talk about it tonight, but I think a lot of you from Louisiana will find what's in my book. There's some interesting stuff about the feather trade and the relationship between New Orleans and the Atchafalaya Basin and Morgan City and New York City, the fashion business, the millinery business specifically, hats, feathers, and it's quite an extraordinary story because it was such a huge part of American fashion, European fashion, and it was quite a big business. But I digress. So he's working alongside this Charlie Lehman, meets Charlie's sister Blanche Lehman, divorcee from New York City, and we don't know much, but they courted briefly and fell in love, courted, and wed in New York at the home of Blanche's mother with the intent to stay in New York, with Henry going to work with Blanche's other brothers in feathers and findings for hats. But shortly after losing their only child in childbirth, Blanche died less than 12 months after she and Henry had married. Heartbroken but undaunted, Bendel stayed in the city, in New York City, and threw himself into the millinery wholesale trade. He briefly went to work for noted department store head Benjamin Altman. That job actually brought him to Paris as a buyer, where his Louisiana-acquired French lubricated his entree into the sacred salons of French couture. Here's the Rue de la Paix in Paris, where many of the great dress houses had their ateliers. Now, things get more interesting. It was through his Altman's buying job that Henry had a major life change, or perhaps epiphany. He began a relationship with another buyer from Altman's, one John Dennison Blish, a dapper man originally from upstate New York who was 14 years older than Henry and who would become an intimate companion as well as a Bendel's store employee for many years to come. More on that in a minute. In no time, Henry struck out on his own and found success with a millinery shop on East 9th Street in Greenwich Village, where he won over a discerning clientele with inventive hats. These are not his hats, but this was the style of that moment in the late 1800s, circa 1896, 97, when Henri opens a shop on 9th Street. And they came in droves to his hat shop. The women, the society women, people weren't really living uptown then. They were more living downtown. It was near Washington Square Park, if you know that part of Greenwich Village. In 1906, he had been so successful with the shop on 9th Street. In 1906, he opened a luxurious multi-floor store at 525th Avenue near 44th Street, expanding his business to include dresses and accessories, and he imported fashion from Paris as well as copying, with permission, Parisian originals. To entice customers, Henri installed an Esty pipe organ in the store and commissioned a noted Episcopal organist, Abraham Beekman Bastedo, to play it. Aha! Handsome Mr. Bastedo, who was a decade younger than Henri and the brother of a famous opera singer, must have hit all the right notes because he and Henri also took up as companions. Remarkably, this did not push John Blish out of the picture. The three gentlemen would go on to live, work, and travel together, openly but discreetly as a less prying time allowed. To outsiders, they were friends and colleagues. To family members, many family members, the truth was understood. Blish and Bastedo took prominent roles in Henri's business. It may have been Abraham's influence, Mr. Bastedo, that led Henri in time to convert to the Episcopal Church, although the seeds were planted at his Jesuit school in Grand Coteau many years before. In my research, I found nothing precise about either the timing or reasons for converting, and none of the descendants of family members I talked to had more information, though several believe Mr. Bastedo was at least a catalyst. I think the Jesuits did their number on him back at I call it Grand Coteau, back at St. Charles. Henri's expanded store was where he introduced the famous brown and white stripes, and he also reinforced his brand by creating house-line soaps and perfumes, and even designing the Baccarat bottles. In short order, Bendel was dubbed fashion advisor to the 400, as the elite New York families were then known. He became an oft-quoted authority in papers and magazines, eventually penning a nationally syndicated style column. Here are a couple of his pearls of fashion wisdom. Quote, "It's always smarter to be informally dressed for formal occasion than to be formally dressed when everyone else is in afternoon or dinner attire." Noted. And naturally, when fabrics are so gorgeous, lines must not be intricate, but flowing and ample. Like the lily, they need no gilding. The business keeps growing. In 1912, Bendel pioneered retail's migration uptown, opening, against the advice of naysayers, a store at 10 and 12 West 57th Street, in what was then a strictly residential part of town, and then watched with satisfaction as other merchants followed. Regally decorated in a French style in muted shades of gray and beige, the first 3 floors were devoted to display and sales and featured sweeping staircases and still novel elevators and antique furniture where milady might sit while a salesperson brought out dresses or hats to peruse. Models would drift around the floors showing off dresses. It garnered the attention of not just the toniest New York women, but also showbiz figures and even royalty. Opera star and friend Geraldine Farrar had a private fitting room. The Prince of Wales warehoused a tuxedo there. As maestro, or you might say micromanager, Henri was not above dressing a window, wrapping a package, or personally greeting customers. Ahead of his time, he would open satellite stores, first in Newport, Rhode Island, then in Palm Beach, Florida. He followed the money. This enhanced his sales, his brand, and his mystique. He also costumed plays and musicals, and as an avid theater goer, this was one of the more fun aspects of the book to research and write. Here's a press shot of the play called The Doctor. And Bendel even costumed a few movies. And over the years, he dressed many stars for their public appearances, draping the likes of Lillian Gish and Billy Berg. I know that's really great. But first and foremost, Bendel was selling haute couture as well as his adapted iterations of it. Here's a little taste. 2 daytime outfits from 1913 and 1914 by the fabled House of the Caillot sisters, a subtle pared down day frock from Jean Paquin. This belongs to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. This is an Elsa Schiaparelli 1938 evening ensemble, also from the Met's collection. And here's a dramatic velvet hat, again belonging to the Met. All of these are in the book. We have about 300 images in the book. Oops. Oh, there. Oh, sorry. Come on. It has to go backwards for me. It won't go backwards for me.
Oh, that's because.
Oh, there we go. Now it won't go. Okay. One more forward is what I'm needing. That. Thank you so much. I'm sure I screwed it up. Here are 3 more sketches from the Bendel sketch collection held at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. It's incredible. A vast trove of over 7,000 sketches of French couture dresses, mostly executed by the couture's own sketch artists, but some perhaps done by Henri's sketchers. The 3 in this slide are from left: a daytime outfit by Pierre Boulez from 1917, a tea dress by Lanvin, 1921, and a fantastic black dress and cape from Coco Chanel's 1920 collection. These are the sketches that Henri and his colleagues brought back each season from Europe, from Paris, both to show very select customers, but also to copy and adapt for American tastes. No digitals back then, no image, no photographs. When the last Bendel family members sold the store in the late 1950s, they gifted the huge cache of sketches to the Brooklyn Museum. And this sexy Jazz Age number was a Bendel label original, currently in the collection of the Rhode Island School of Design Museum. Now, Bendel's business success can hardly be overstated. In 1906, he pulled in what today would be well more than $5 million, and within 8 years, his volume had risen to the modern equivalent of $35 million a year. Oh, this isn't happening. Oh, yeah, it is. There we go. One of Henri's innovations, I want to make sure we don't run out of time here. One of Henri's innovations was semi-annual clearance sale. And the painting I chose for the book's cover, Spring Sale at Bendel's, by Florian Stettheimer from 1921, which belongs to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, captures both the elegance and the chaos that such a sale engendered, with women enthusiastically trying on dresses in a sort of orgy of shopping, with one woman nearly falling off a balustrade trying to snag a scarf. Amid this mayhem, the figure at the bottom of the stairs, Henri, keeps a placid expression, no doubt inwardly overjoyed. Stettheimer likely took her inspiration from newspaper accounts of Bendel's clearance sales that required cops outside to handle the traffic jam and dozens of extra salespeople brought in to accommodate huge throngs. But this speaks to something else interesting, I think. In offering clearance sales and in selling such accessories as hats, gloves, perfume, soap, etc., Bendel was offering price-friendly acquisitions to women who weren't in the top tier of the moneyed classes. He was, in his upscale way, part of a movement toward democratization in fashion, a breaking down of the old order that was happening in all facets of American life at this time, in the teens and then into the 20s. That being said, Bendel's prosperity allowed him to indulge other aesthetic passions, from architecture, collecting antiques, and religious art, and gardening. On Long Island's Gold Coast, at Kings Point, he commissioned Henry Otis Chapman, who had designed his 57th Street building, to create a Gatsby-worthy mansion in Gatsby territory, fronting Long Island Sound. Yeah, and here is Henri himself with his family, who calls it the Bathing Beauties picture, with his sisters and a niece behind the house. In 1923, he didn't really live there that long. In 1923, he sold the property to auto magnate Walter Chrysler. And today the house is the main administrative building of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, right there on the water on Long Island Sound, very close to New York. In the late 20s, Bendel built another domestic masterpiece in Stamford, Connecticut, Laurel Lake Lodge, modeled on two specific Tudor houses in England. It was a repository for his rare Gothic and Renaissance tapestries, antique furniture, and acres of sterling silver and fine china acquired by Henry on excursions to London and the continent. Here's a peek inside. The living room, very somewhere between Gothic and Victorian to my eyes. The entrance hall and dining room. And here's the music hall, which featured a massive ST pipe organ for Mr. Bastedo to play. A lot of people of means back in that era had pipe organs in their house. Yeah, no comment. Here's the beautiful veranda. It doesn't look exactly like this now, but if you're in the Stamford, Connecticut or Greenwich, Connecticut area, it's worth a trip. I'll tell you what the house became. You can visit. The ends look like Henry's era, but some of the outside still does. Henry peppered the grounds with much European statuary. Here are marble horses and a large fountain that was hauled over from Italy and reassembled in Connecticut. That's just a piece of the very huge, long fountain. And here's Henry reading a magazine in the sunroom, what was called the sunroom. Today, the house is the main building of the Stamford Museum and Nature Center, and some of Henry's statuary can still be seen there. So, along with his companions, Blish and Bastedo, Henry's blood family was also in the mix, very much. Two nephews moved up from Lafayette at a young age, 17, it was the first, moved up from New York from Lafayette and became part of the business. The elder brother, Leon Schmulin, son of Henry's sister Fanny and her husband Gus Schmulin, quickly rose to a leading role at his uncle's store. Here he is escorting Henry's great-niece Marjorie Meyer on a ship crossing to France. And some of you, any of you familiar with Lafayette may know the name Maurice Hyman, who built our city's oil center business district as well as becoming a leading philanthropist. Well, he got his start in retail back in the 1920s when he bought the clothing business of Gus and Fanny Schmulin, Leon's parents, when they retired up to New York State to be closer to their son. So many Lafayette threads wind back to the Bendel clan. When Henry's half-sister Emma died prematurely in 1950, when Henry's half-sister Emma's husband died prematurely in 1915 in Lafayette, Bendel invited Emma to move in with him up east along with her two young children, Benjamin and Flory Levy, whom he took custody of. The boy Benji he renamed Henri Bendel II, and who came to be known as Little Henry, though he got very, very tall. Here are Little Henry and Flory at Kings Point on Long Island. Henry II was attending military school, hence the uniform, though he got savvy about millinery later. Let me back up a bit. Despite his busy life and luxurious lifestyle up east, Henry's heart remained down south, and his loyalty to his family was unwavering. It's worth taking a moment to note how much of an influence Henry's family had on Lafayette by this time. Henry's father, stepfather, and various cousins were early fundraisers and planners for an eventual temple and Jewish cemetery in Lafayette on land donated back in 1869 by Governor Alexander Mouton, whose father, Jean Mouton, interestingly enough, had deeded the land that the town's cathedral was built on years earlier. The Bendel, Plonsky, Levy families were key benefactors of Congregation Rodef Shalom. Its synagogue, which has had various architectural incarnations, is still in its original location at the corner of Lee Avenue in Jackson Street in downtown Lafayette. Other Jewish names who led these efforts include Wise, Haas, Lieberman, and Kahn, among others. According to ISJL's Encyclopedia of Southern Jewish Communities, quote, Lafayette's history has been inextricably bound with its Jewish population. Although they have always been a very small percentage of the local population, Jews were never on the periphery in Lafayette. Without several influential Jewish businessmen, Lafayette's development would certainly have been different. I would add, it would have been far inferior. When Henry's stepfather, Benjamin Falk, died in 1901, he was hailed as one of the most important business leaders of Lafayette. And when Henry's mother, Mary Falk, passed away in 1915, she was recognized as an enterprising merchant who was pivotal to Lafayette's growth. To commemorate their lives, as well as that of his father, William, who had died when Henry was just a boy, Bendel commissioned a large sculpture of 2 bronze figures called Angel and Mourner, which was designed and cast in Italy and installed in Lafayette by E. Weiblein Marble and Granite Works of New Orleans. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that name. The dramatic sculpture still makes quite an impression at the Hebrew Rest Cemetery off of University Avenue and stands out in another sense, as angels are not a common motif in Jewish cemeteries. Having always made regular trips back home to visit family, in the late 1920s, Bendel acquired a nearly 200-acre former plantation property, then just on the outskirts of Lafayette, which he landscaped with live oaks, magnolia trees, and thousands of azalea and camellia bushes. There he built a charming Spanish-style home that he dubbed the Camellia Lodge. When I was growing up, this house still sat at the entrance of our neighborhood. In the early 2000s, it was torn down because of termite damage. I know. And we're all people still like, oh, how did it happen? Henry spent 5 or 6 happy winter sojourns here, all the while making plans to build a larger manor house nearby, right along the Vermilion River, where he could retire. Sadly, he did not live to see this dream realized. He died of a heart attack in his Park Avenue apartment in March of 1936. He was 68 years old. Some 500 mourners attended his funeral at Frank Campbell Funeral Home in Manhattan, and all the major New York papers noted his significant contributions to fashion and to business. Note whose name on, equal size lettering, which I find telling. Primary heirs included his nephew, his adopted nephew, Henri Bendel II, and Bendel's companion, Abraham Bastedo, both of whom continued to run the store along with Henry's nephew, Leon Schmulin, who eventually became the front man, working there until the 1950s. Mr. Bastedo was willed the use of Laurel Lake Lodge for life. So in Bendel's time, an epic style liberation occurred, which he, paradoxically classic and conservative yet ever attuned to the new, had a gloved hand in. He was a crucial link in the transition from bustles to flappers and between Europe and America. Fittingly, France bestowed upon him its prestigious Legion of Honor. He exemplified raw American ambition and business savvy, but also old world refinement and down-home Southern charm. He was sometimes given to folksy phrasing when he would give an interview. I don't have a great example, but it's in the book. Bendel's main legacy was his store, which continued to thrive, though at times, though at times with financial headwinds for many decades. Here are some editorial and advertising images from the 1930s and 40s. Note that the 2 photographs left and center, both by the great photographer George Platt Lynes. A lot of very famous photographers, Avedon and others, did Bendel's ads and editorial for years and years. Henry's devotion to innovation eventually found its match in the person of Geraldine Stutz, president of the store from 1957 to 1986. A young and vibrant up-and-comer at I. Miller Shoes when she was picked by the head of Genesco, the fashion conglomerate that had acquired Bendel's. Jerry, as she was called, led with what a former colleague told me was a whim of iron, and put her theatrical stamp, she had wanted to be an actress, on everything, most famously pioneering Bendel's industry-changing street of shops, a series of distinct micro-boutiques on the first floor laid out in the manner of a kind of Casbah marketplace, and specific to such things as hosiery, accessories, perfume, shoes, even housewares. That's commonplace now. It was novel when she did it, again in the 60s. Under Stutz, Bendel's introduced America to such key European and British designers as Sonia Rykiel and Jean Weir, and gave critical early boosts to American stars Ralph Lauren and Perry Ellis, as well as to Stephen Burrows, one of the first Black American breakout designers. After Mr. Leslie Wexner of The Limited acquired Bendel's in 1985, the store went through many transformations. He moved the flagship to a new space on Fifth Avenue in 1990. Here he is at the grand opening with Brooke Astor and Jackie Onassis. And he tried different merchandising approaches and broadening its demographic and its offerings, even expanding to other cities, including Chicago. At times in the 90s, the store again leaned into cutting-edge fashion, but by the early 2000s, enduring heavy financial setbacks, Bendel's ditched dresses and bridal wear altogether to sell only accessories, and in its final few years, what might charitably be described as bling, in diminutive mall stores across the country, as well as in the Fifth Avenue flagship. Henri probably would not have understood Bendel's final Bendel Girl and Gossip Girl years, nor approved of them. And yet, if he had been faced with the challenges that retail experienced in this century and buckets of red ink, he might have startled the industry in equally dramatic ways. Adjusting to challenges was how he had run his business and lived his life. It is the motto of the house, never to follow, but always to lead, he said, and for that one must keep thinking and be ever on the alert. One lapse and the other fellow is ahead. But confident and competitive as he was, Bendel also possessed humility and was quick to share credit, a quality we may feel nostalgic for in this age of self-aggrandizement. It is with the collaboration of the people I have surrounded myself by, and by years of perseverance and experience, that I have achieved my success, Henri told a newspaper editor. Quote, without them, I could not have accomplished the things I have. So that's Henri, and I probably have gone a little longer on that than I should have, because I did want to say a few things about the experience and the journey of writing the book and looking for Henri. But I also want to, if you have any questions, I want to take questions too. But let me just for a few moments say that this was both a slow and fast thing. It was, the seed was planted 15 years ago by a friend in Lafayette who had seen a painting, an oil painting of Henri at the Lafayette Museum. It's the old Mouton house of the Governor Mouton. And she thought that Henri was a forgotten figure and thought someone ought to do a book or a magazine. And my background, as you heard, was magazines. I'd never written a book. And I thought, well, she's right. And she'd done a little digging, and I did some more digging. And what I discovered was how lost he really had become and how little there was out there on him. There were newspaper articles, particularly mainly down south and mainly in Lafayette, but no book, no national magazine article had ever been written about him. And it was a tough hunt. So the reason it's slow was because the next number of years, I put the project down more than once, because without diaries or, he didn't write his own memoir. Without diaries, he didn't leave behind letters, family members. I met a lot of descendants, and they were extremely helpful, but they didn't have letters that Henri had written. So I had a lot of trepidation about finding his voice. But because of his great public persona and the fact that he had the syndicated column, mainly all across the nation, and then also a column in Harper's Bazaar, he really had left behind a lot of his very piquant, colorful voice and his passion, just incredible passion for fashion and for women's dress, and I think truly for women. He, could you say he was modern or, women's liber? No. He was a fashion dictator to a degree, but he often talked about, and this is more in the book, about women, particularly in the jazz age, sort of finding their own liberation and knowing what they wanted to wear. And he wrote a lot about, talked a lot about, they did idolize French fashion, and the very wealthiest made their own trips to Paris and bought their couture dresses in person. But women were starting, he argued that the American women had a different ethos and point of view about fashion than French women, and it was the American, the new pioneer spirit, independent American way. And so he was a champion for this transition, and in his way, I think, was empowering women to some degree dress the way they wanted to dress. And he followed behind. He did not always say, you've got to do it this way. So I found his voice that way, and then there's a great memoir written by his great niece, Marjorie Meyer Arsht of Houston. She's deceased, but she wrote a great book called All the Way from Yoakum about her life. She's very politically connected in Texas and in Washington, D.C., but she was a girl and then a young woman when Henri was living, and she spent a lot of time with Henri. He helped send her to the Sorbonne one semester, and he helped her out when she attended Columbia in New York, and she stayed with him a lot in Connecticut. And she had some very vivid kind of snapshots of what Henri was like off stage, behind the scenes. So I folded that into the book. So over time, I felt like between the fashion story and the business story and his public voice and these glimpses and stories that the descendants would tell me that their mothers or their grandmother would, had some Henri lore and legend, I started putting the mosaic together. And I'll say finally, before asking for questions, that this long period of poking at the subject and not sure I was going to do the book, I call it the kismet of COVID. In the winter of 2021, I met a wonderful man, Josh Caffrey, who runs the Center for Louisiana Studies in Lafayette, and UL Press sits within that organization or department. And I said, I've got this book proposal on Henri Bendel that I trotted around to some national publishers in New York. Would you like to look at it? And he loved the idea of UL doing the book because Henri was from Lafayette, and it was a kind of just a great fit. And that was a big impetus for me. I realized people in New York in the fashion world didn't know who the real Henri Bendel was. It was just a name. It was just the name on the store. And people down, even in Lafayette, even people in Bend who lived in Bendel Gardens, Henri Bendel, who was he? And that was the primary motivation for me to do the book. I just thought, all right, enough of this. It all needs to be put in one place, and people need to understand. So Josh green lighted the book, and then I went to town and wrote it in about 2.5 years, and then the fluff and fold of photo acquisition and all the editing process. But it was a really wonderful dual homecoming, trying to bring Henri back to Lafayette, and it brought me back to my hometown in ways that I really wouldn't have imagined a few years ago I would get to enjoy. And it brought me here tonight to be with all of you. So I'm grateful. Thanks for listening. And I would love to take any questions.
I want to thank you. My name is Ann Zova Kiefer. My grandfather was Sam Plonsky.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Brother
speak into that so that people on Zoom can hear you, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah, you might almost repeat that.
Brother of Mary Plonsky.
Oh, my gosh.
So my mother's family, Myrtle Plonsky, grew up in Washington, Louisiana. Sam went to Washington.
Right. There's some of them are buried in Washington.
So Mary was in Lafayette.
Wow, I'm so excited to meet you.
And Sam went to Washington.
Wow.
So if the Jews in Lafayette were like the Jews in Washington, they knew they were Jewish, and they knew what a matzo ball was.
Yeah.
But they sang in the Baptist church choir.
Yeah.
But and my grandmother confirmed everybody, but I'm telling you, that's all they knew about Judaism. When my mother married my dad and came to New Orleans, it was a revelation.
Wow.
So if the Lafayette Jews, so for Henry to convert, it was easy.
Wow.
It's not that we didn't, they don't love their Judaism, but it's just, it didn't go very deeply. But I can tell you that the legend of Henri Bendel, cousin Henry, was always there, but we didn't know anything about him.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful. I'm glad to meet you.
This part of my family.
Yeah, I'm so lucky.
It's so wonderful because it's I don't know what to tell you.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here. Make sure we talk afterwards.
A few copies of the book, and
make
we'll
sure
talk
I get,
so I can send them around. There's not many of us left. I'm 80.
Yeah, that's exciting.
So I was the young one.
That's so exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We'll talk afterwards. Thank you. Is there any? We've got time for more questions, right, Lizzie?
Absolutely. And
and if no one has more questions,
we have one in the chat. We have one in the chat, and then I'll pass this mic around as well. In person, we'll go, do you have any info on Bendel's interest in exercise? Joe Pilates had a studio in New York, in the New York store.
Oh, that's funny. It's in my book. He opened, Geraldine Stutz just would try anything that interested her, she would put in Bendel's, particularly in the 60s. She started in 57, but in the mid-60s, and the 60s were kind of wild and transition-y, right? And people were doing things. And this was probably in the early 70s. She found out about Pilates, and Joe Pilates himself came, and there were press pictures of them like hauling the Pilates equipment up to the 7th floor. She had a hair salon at one point. She had the Pilates studio. But things would come. They'd 6 months, a year, and then it would change. And I could never track all of that. But there was actually pictures that ran in the press of like Joe Pilates is the guy's name, who knew, with his shirt off, doing exercises on the 7th floor, 5th floor, whatever, of Bendel's. Yes.
Fantastic. Do we have any questions in person quite yet?
Is there somebody?
Okay. What was something surprising that you learned about Henri in your research? What was a surprising, or the store?
Well, I guess I was surprised at how he could be so old-fashioned maybe to the point of fuddy-duddy, or real stickler for propriety. And he had one leg in the 1800s and one leg in the 20th century, and I was surprised for all of that, how he could embrace the jazz age and this new selling techniques and modern technology and the new electrical system. And they had Con Ed magazine did a story on when when he opened the 57th Street store. At some point, they had the latest and the greatest of lighting and electricity and irons and things. And part of it was new fire safety things, but also it was things to make the seamstresses and the cutters and the designers. He had a lot of back of house people on the upper floors of the store to make their lives a little more civilized. I mean, it wouldn't cut mustard now. Like you would be like, please. They were still locked in a 9-hour, 10-hour day, ironing or whatever. But it was an upgrade. And so I thought that was sort of interesting about him, that he was adaptable and could be modern for being such a really old-fashioned guy.
Oh, wait. Just speak in the
Oh,
thing
I'm
so
sorry.
the Zoomers can hear you.
And then I'll get you behind him after him.
What you just said seemed to me that fit in with him taking whatever the most current fashion might have been
Yeah.
in Paris
Yeah,
and adapting it,
yes,
but as a businessman,
yeah,
being very cognizant of what you have to do to be a success.
yes.
And
yes.
so it ties in with kind of that go-getter from a child. He was
Yes.
always reaching out for something
Yes,
to do.
absolutely, yes.
Far more intriguing
Yeah.
than I only knew the name.
Yeah.
But so much more to him.
Yeah, and it's this might be the only chance I get to say that I think I'm most struck by, with regards to what you're saying, I'm most struck by his extreme duality of being this real aesthete, this real artist who could design a hat or zhuzh a window display, wrap a package, all the pretty stuff, and yet a ferocious business person who was tracking the bottom lines and was probably a fairly tough taskmaster to a very large staff. So that, sure, a lot of people are both good business and creative, but when you get it at such a high level on both sides, I think that's what makes Bendel almost unique. Now, you can't name another department store czar like Henry sort of was, if that's a fair word to use, that had as much of the creative side.
He knew how to make decisions, too.
That's what I mean.
He could select
yes.
from either side, probably very right and left brain at the same
There's
time.
a great story that I only learned after, and I didn't get in the book, and if we ever get to do an updated version, a revision, I would try to squeeze this in about, at some point deep into his life, some money manager types were telling him that a woman who had gotten a dress for her daughter or a whole trousseau, really huge order, very expensive, she had not paid up yet. And Henry said, well, it doesn't matter, she's going to pay up. And the new business manager said, you've got to send her a letter, you've got to send a note, we have to get this, bill paid. And Henry was very reluctant, and he did it against his will, and all hell broke loose. She was infuriated, cut him off, and he had to make it up by giving her daughter some dresses, and he smoothed it over. But he said, that was me in a weak moment listening to the business guys, the money guys, because he also really treasured these relationships and the trust, and he was old world, he was a Southerner. He was friendly and casual about things. Ooh, I was warned that could happen. Anyway, sorry, you had one.
Hi. I've always wondered about the brown and white signature logo look. Can you tell me about that?
Yes,
have one more after.
Started to glancingly mention that when he opened so he's on 9th Street with the hats circa the late 1890s, and then in 1906 he moves to 5th Avenue between 43rd and 44th for a few years before he jumps up to 57th Street. When he moved to 5th Avenue in 06, that was sort of the real beginning of his branding, and he sketched that out himself, the brown and white stripes. What his motivation, why brown and white stripes, it's lost to history, but you have to admit it's a very classy look, and he really had his hand in all of the aesthetic decisions.
And I remember the Lalique windows in the store.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, that's why Jackie Onassis was in that photograph. When Les Wexner moved to a new building, two buildings that were combined on 5th Avenue, which was the last location for the flagship, it had been the Lalique perfume store back in the 1920s, and the windows were all sooted over and painted over and a mess. Maybe you could see them from the street, I don't know, but Mrs. Onassis sort of took that on. They took that to the preservation committee, or thing that the organization she worked with, and they made a big deal out of that, the preservation, the cleaning up of the Lalique windows, beautiful etched glass windows. So if you went in the store, you could go up to these different mezzanines, and you were right there with the beautiful windows. And they're still visible, and there's no one occupying that space right now. It's still empty the last time I looked.
Is that a question or? It's a lovely comment. Oh, so there's some lovely comments in the chat as well.
Well, we hate those. We don't want that.
But as the arbiter of time, I get to ask the last question.
Okay.
And then the folks in person, we can chat outside at the book signing as well. But let's bring it back home. He was a family man, right?
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about his connection to the South and his family's connection to the North?
As I said, he was very loyal. He made many trips back to Lafayette. He took a shine to Palm Beach too at some point. And then he would Rolls Royce down, take his Rolls Royce down, and he and Mr. Bastedo and sometimes Mr. Blish, they would go to Palm Beach in the winter, and then they'd come to Lafayette for part of the winter, and he could tend his camellia bushes, and his real passion, one of his passions was gardening. But he was so loyal to his family members, to his nieces, nephews, cousins, and he would give them jobs in the company. He would give them money. He would give them gifts, and he became sort of known for naming several of the nieces and nephews, or great nieces and nephews. A niece would have a baby, and the family would defer to Uncle Henry to name the child. Like she called herself Elaine Davis, who lived in Houston, a great philanthropist, but it was Elaine, E-L-E-N-E. She pronounced it Elaine, and everyone in the family said Elaine. But Henry had dictated that this child must be Hélène, the French name, because he was just such a raging Francophile. But so loyal to his family, frequent trips back, constant contact, which is why I was frustrated that no one has shown me a letter, correspondence. But again, the people I was communicating with were people who were third generation, fourth generation down. So, things get misplaced. But very loyal, and he really did want to retire and settle on the Vermilion River, and he just didn't quite get there.
Well, the conversation does not have to end now for us in person, but the time is now 7:00. So I want to thank Tim
thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for coming out in the rain and this awful weather.
Yeah. Please move to the museum store, buy the book, get it signed. People online, msjestore.org, to buy this really fantastic book with more than 300 photos.
Something like that.
Amazing. It's worth it. It's beautiful. It's really a beautiful book. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Zoom. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.